Welcome back to AIM Truthcast. Today we're going to look at another segment of significant publications. And this time we're going to be looking at an article published at the end of 2025 in the Schizophrenia Research Journal. Just a couple months ago in 2025, there was an article published in Schizophrenia Research, one of the most significant and respected journals on the construct of schizophrenia, the other likely being the Schizophrenia Bulletin. And so in this journal, there was an overview done of all the literature looking at how sleep disturbances can affect or even cause what they call first episode psychosis as well as chronic psychosis. So the construct of schizophrenia itself is called chronic psychosis. In fact, it's chronic psychosis of unknown cause. It's called schizophrenia because they're not sure why someone has chronic psychosis. As I've said before, chronic psychosis is real, but labeling it schizophrenia doesn't make schizophrenia real. It just is a confession that there is no known cause to that specific chronic psychosis in that individual. And each person that gets labeled as schizophrenic or goes into chronic psychosis has a different pathology. There's a different course that is followed to get to that point. Well, today's significant publication has incredible significance to me. In fact, it makes me really excited to see this publication. And the reason is because the conclusion of this extensive research and looking at all of the available scientific evidence, all the literature, all the empirical evidence that has been accumulated, this is the conclusion that they have come to. They write, sleep disturbances are increasingly recognized as integral to the psychopathology of psychosis, often presenting as early as the prodromal phase and persisting throughout the illness trajectory. These disturbances encompass a broad range of abnormalities, including poor sleep quality, altered sleep architecture, and circadian rhythm disruptions. Such changes are not merely epiphenomena of psychosis, but may contribute to its onset and progression, potentially serving as both risk factors and modifiable treatment targets. Now, why this excites me so much is that in my book, The Schizophrenic Unicorn, I showed how sleep is always a central cause of psychosis. And I say central because we have to find the reason sleep is being disrupted. It's not enough to say sleep is essential, sleep disruption is a central cause. We have to find out why sleep is being disrupted, and that is different for every single person that goes into either a first episode psychosis or what they call chronic psychosis. And so they are proving and really validating what I have said in my book. And of course, the science is there. The empirical evidence is in my book. I didn't need this. It's just exciting to see that they are coming to the same conclusion, which explains why so many of the world's leading psychiatrists like Kenneth Kendler and Sir Robin Murray have said there is no such thing as schizophrenia because all of this goes through sleep problems. Let me read another quote from this article that I think is also helpful in regard to drugs. As I've stated, I am not opposed to a short-term use of tranquilizers or what they call antipsychotics. And the reason is because if sleep disruption is a central problem, and as this article points out, it almost always is, unless you take into account drugs, which they also point out in this article, disrupt sleep mechanisms. It's incredible to see that they're coming to the same conclusion. If you can't tell, I'm excited. But they point out that these drugs do cause somnolence. So if sleep disruption's a central problem, then you're going to have to deal with that. And antipsychotics provide that tool, again, short term, because as they point out in this article, long term, they can permanently disrupt sleep mechanisms and do even more harm to the body. And so to me, this is not a moral issue. I don't see any moral issue. In fact, I think it's immoral not to give these drugs to someone that is in a crisis because psychotic states can cause worse damage to the body. It can become chronic, and all the evidence points to in first episode psychosis, if you're able to get that person back to a stable and normal sleep architecture, that it doesn't become chronic. And in order to do that, you first have to get them stable, but then you also have to find out the underlying cause, whether spiritual or physical, to that central problem. So listen to this quote that they give here in regard to drugs specifically. Among the most relevant areas for future investigation is the role of pharmacological treatments in managing sleep disturbances. Pharmacological treatments also play a role in managing sleep disturbances. Melatonin receptor agonists and antipsychotics, which by the way usually are a combination of D2 antagonists. They work by blocking reuptake of the D2. They block the D2 receptor, so they block dopamine reuptake, and serotonin inhibitors as well. And that's your typical like olanzapine, clozapine, etc. The article goes on, with sedative properties can improve sleep outcomes by enhancing sleep architecture and reducing the time needed to fall asleep. However, these interventions must be carefully managed to avoid side effects such as daytime sedation or metabolic complications. I've seen this firsthand when people have underlying metabolic problems that are not discovered because once you black box a real problem, when you cast a label, a psychiatric label on, you don't usually get to the real cause of sleep disruption. You're content to think that explains the problem. But when they're given clozapine or olanzapine that are known to cause metabolic problems, it actually worsens their symptoms. They can become very irritated, angry, even violent. And so a lot of what is called worsening symptoms, especially as they enter into psychiatric hospitals where the guidelines tell the psychiatrist to give clozapine and olanzapine. Those are the two most common choices. The article continues on here. While antipsychotics may help regulate sleep patterns in first episode psychotic patients by promoting sedation and enhancing sleep continuity, their effects often target symptoms rather than underlying mechanisms of sleep disturbances. And that is incredibly significant, and I would agree 100% with that. We do need to help them sleep. The problem is you're just dealing with symptoms. You're not fixing any underlying mechanism of sleep. You got to really find out what's causing sleep disruption, and every single individual is different. It's not always sleep apnea. It's not always outright insomnia. It's not always drug use. It's not always trauma. All of those things can cause sleep disruption, but so too can autism. So too can Lyme's disease. So too can Huntington's disease. So too can a traumatic brain injury. We have to do our due diligence in working with physicians to look at physical things. Pastors and biblical counselors need to look at spiritual things. Anxiety is the number one cause of sleep disruption. And I've seen this firsthand as well. People who really struggle with anxiety often go into manic episodes or hypomania or even hyperactivity. All of these are part of how we decline when we're not getting proper sleep. It's not a neutral thing. You don't just enter into one point. You get worse and worse and worse if it's not resolved. So the article goes on here. For instance, these medications may improve sleep architecture, such as increasing total sleep time or reducing nocturnal awakenings, but they do not directly address the cognitive, behavioral, or environmental factors that contribute to disrupted sleep. Just like what I was just saying, there's relationships involved, there's the spiritual nature, there are valid physical problems that have to be looked at. And as soon as you accept a psychiatric diagnosis like schizophrenia, you stop looking for these things. You think you have found the cause of your problems. And to me, this is incredibly disingenuous and deceitful and really unethical if you think about it. I want to make it clear, though, that psychiatrists are not purposely doing this. They're being told what to do. They have guidelines that they have to follow. Otherwise, they get sued. They get malpractice suits against them. They lose insurance, etc. So they're not the problem. I know many personally, and they have a heart to help people. It's not helpful to attack them. They're actually stuck in this system as well. And quite frankly, at times when they administer these drugs, it can be life-saving for people who are in a psychotic break or keep them from going into that worsening chronic state. So we want to reset sleep, and sometimes, again, not always, giving these tranquilizers, what are called antipsychotics, these major tranquilizers, help reestablish healthy sleep architecture, and then the real problems can be found. If the real problems aren't found, you will have worsening states down the road, especially as the body catches up with the dosage of the antipsychotics, usually happening between 6 to 8 months from my own experience, and there's actual literature on this as well. So he continues on, such a maladaptive thought patterns, irregular sleep-wake schedules, or environmental disruptions remain unresolved. This masking effect can complicate long-term management as it may delay the identification of treatment of root causes, potentially leading to persistent sleep problems once the medication is reduced or discontinued. Therefore, while antipsychotics can be a valuable tool for accurate symptom management, they should be used in conjunction with non-pharmacological strategies to ensure a more comprehensive and sustainable approach to treating sleep disturbances in first episode psychotic patients. So you can see why I'm so excited, because now psychiatry is starting to catch up with this valid biblical perspective that sleep is essential for good health. We must submit our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable unto God. It's no accident that God established in Genesis 1 and 2 that there's a cycle concerning the sun going up and going down in darkness and light. And we have these same circadian rhythms, is what science has elected to call this need to conform to God's design. And we're meant to sleep when it's dark. We're meant to get rest in that REM state. And when we don't, we enter into mania or psychosis, which is a perversion, if you would, of REM state. REM is incredibly healthy, and we go into those psychotic states every single night. So when it happens in a wakeful state, there is clearly something wrong. There's clearly a concern that must be addressed. And it's not enough just to accept a psychiatric label. We must get to root causes. Well, I hope you're excited as I am. Science, once again, valid science, is catching up with the Bible. And that should give us incredible confidence that we need to understand who we are in Christ. When we do, we'll accept both the physical and the spiritual rather than reducing everything to a physical explanation. And that is precisely why psychiatry exists. We've got to get back to a biblical starting point if we want biblical answers and biblical remedies. There is hope. Thanks for joining us today in Significant Publications. I hope you'll come back.